Hello, Kate B. Oh, hello, and welcome. Apologies for being so very late today. It has been fairly murderously hot. So this is not going to be a particularly long one. There's less of the story left than I anticipated, but I thought you might like to hear the ending sooner rather than later. Hey, Grona. That wonderful moment when you thought you'd done about half the story and you realised you'd actually done about 3/4. So, yeah. I hope if you're in heatwave zone, I hope you're surviving. Okay. Our break ends in 20 odd seconds. And we will get back to the final part of the Gateway of the Monster. A brief recap. Thomas Carnacki was invited to investigate a allegedly haunted room in a manor house outside London, in which 3 people at least had been killed in mysterious circumstances. And after spending a night or so on preliminary investigations and establishing that something was opening the room's door without actually unlocking it, he spent the night inside his occult barriers and discovered that it's haunted by a spectral hand that nearly did for him, and did indeed do for the cat he brought into the room for experimental purposes. So, I will give you the tail end. Yeah, indeed, poor kitty, indeed. It really, yeah, that was no good. As the first touch of dawn came into the sky, that unnatural wind ceased in a single moment, and I could see no sign of the hand. The dawn came slowly, and presently the one light filled all the room and made the pale glare of the electric pentacle look more unearthly. Yet it was not until the day had fully come that I made any attempt to leave the barrier, for I did not know but there was some method abroad in the sudden stopping of that wind to entice me from the pentacles. At last, when the dawn was strong and bright, I took one last look around and ran for the door. I got it unlocked in a nervous and clumsy fashion, then locked it hurriedly and went to my bedroom, where I lay on the bed and tried to steady my nerves. Peter came presently with the coffee, and when I'd drunk it, I told him I meant to have a sleep, as I'd been up all night. He took the tray and went out quietly, and after I'd locked my door, I turned in properly, and at last got to sleep. So that's where we were. Peter's the servant is clearly imperturbable, well, mostly, unless dealing with the actual haunting, and seems to have evolved a very practical way of dealing with it, which is I don't go in there after dark. Seems quite sensible. But sensible and Carnacki, not the same thing. You could redo this slightly in a modern setting, it occurs to me. Especially if the owner wanted, for example, to start letting the place out, as is quite or have people rent rooms in the place, as is quite often the case with old and extremely expensive to upkeep buildings. Welcome, Molybfornum. You are very welcome here. This reading's not going to be terribly long. I will say, however, I will be doing a game stream after. Fancy Airbnb, exactly. Yep. Very. Yeah, that's a standard, not the Airbnb bit, but letting out rooms, allowing it to be used for filming. That's the kind of thing that people who inherit large, big houses in the UK quite often have to do. They, they're likely to have all the titles and manorial history and naff all money because the roof will always need doing, or the gardens will always need extra staff and that kind of thing. So this is why it's quite often people who are very upper class. It would be council tax, but if it's of historic interest, and if it's in the care of something like English heritage or historic houses, or National Trust, then I gather such things are ameliorated. But just the heating, lighting, employment bills, because in the really big estates, of course, all the local villages or local community rely on the big house as a source of major employment. And they have to try and keep it relevant and keep the money coming in so they can do things like repairs and maintain the fabric of the building, both for historical purposes and just because it's people's homes and lives. There's a very interesting National Trust series of occasional episodes, particularly at Christmas. I think they've covered things like Chatsworth. If you get the chance to seek them out on something like not BBC America, BitBox, that kind of thing. It is interesting watching them go through the seasons and all trying to work to make sure that everything is kept up, everything is maintained, everything's restored, whilst also trying to bring money in via the property without selling out completely and just having it turned into Disneyland. But anyway, I digress. I woke about midday and after some lunch went up to the grey room. I switched off the current from the pentacle, which I'd left on in my hurry. Also, I removed the body of the cat. You can understand that I did not want anyone to see the poor brute. After that, I made a very careful search of the corner where the bedclothes had been thrown. I made several holes and probed and found nothing. Then it occurred to me to try with my instrument under the skirting. I did so and heard my wire ring on metal. I turned the hook end that way and fished for the thing. After the second go, I got it. It was a small object and I took it to the window. I found it to be a curious ring made of some greying material. The curious thing about it was that it was made in the form of a pentagon. That is, the same shape as the inside of the magic pentacle, but without the mounts which form the points of the defensive star. It was free from all chasing or engraving. You will understand that I was excited when I tell you that I felt sure I held in my hand the famous luck ring of the Anderson family. Just a quick reminder, Mr. Anderson was the person who owns the property So the fact that he's referred to as Mr. Anderson, we're talking descended from wealthy landowners. Whether he still is wealthy or whether this is now the sole remains of the estate, but not necessarily titled. The luck ring of the Anderson family, which indeed was of all things the one most intimately connected with the history of the haunting. This ring was handed on from father to son through generations, and always, in obedience to some ancient family tradition, each son had to promise never to wear the ring. The ring, I may say, was brought home by one of the Crusaders under very peculiar circumstances, but the story's too long to go into here. It appears that young Sir Hubert, an ancestor of Anderson's, made a bet, in drink, that he would wear the ring that night. He did so, and in the morning his wife and child were found strangled in the bed in the very room in which I stood. Many people, it would seem, thought young Sir Hubert was guilty of having done the thing in drunken anger, and he, in an attempt to prove his innocence, slept a second night in the room. He also was strangled. Since then, as you may imagine, no one has ever spent a night in the grey room until I did so. The ring had been lost for so long that it had almost become a myth, and it was most extraordinary to stand there with the actual thing in my hand, as you can understand. It was whilst I stood there looking at the ring that I got an idea. Supposing that it were in a way a doorway, do you see what I mean? A sort of gap in the world hedge. It was a queer idea, I know, and probably was not my own, but came to me from the outside. You see, the wind had come from that part of the room where the ring lay. I thought a lot about it. Then the shape, the inside of a pentacle. It had no mounts, and without mounts, as the Sigsand manuscript has it, the mounts which are the 5 hills of safety, to lack is to give power to the demon, and surely to favour the evil thing. You see, the very shape of the ring was significant, and I determined to test it. Idiot. I unmade the pentacle, for it must be made afresh and around the one to be protected. Then I went out and locked the door, after which I left the house to get certain matters. For neither yarbs, nor fire, nor water must be used a second time. I returned about 7:30, and as soon as the things I had bought had been carried up to the grey room, I dismissed Peter for the night, just as I'd done the evening before. When he had gone downstairs, I let myself into the room and locked and sealed the door. I went to the place in the centre of the room where all the stuff had been packed, and set to work with all my speed to construct a barrier about me and the ring. I don't remember whether I explained it to you, but I had reasoned that if the ring were in any way a medium of admission, and it were enclosed with me in the electric pentacle, it would be, to express it loosely, insulated. Do you see? The force which had visible expression as a hand would have to stay beyond the barrier which separates the ab from the normal, for the gateway would be removed from accessibility. As I was saying, I worked with all my speed to get the barrier completed about me and the ring, for it was already later than I cared to be in that room unprotected. Also, I had a feeling there would be a vast effort made that night to regain the use of the ring, for I had the strongest conviction that the ring was a necessity to materialization. You'll see whether I was right. I completed the barriers in about an hour, and you can imagine something of the relief I felt when the pale glare of the electric pentacle once more with the lost that again. And you can imagine something of the relief I felt when I felt the pale glare of the electric pentacle once more all about me. From then onward, for about 2 hours, I sat quietly, facing the corner from which the wind came. Kate B, that doesn't sound right. It sounds like you're going to let the thing into your circle with you. Oh, yes. You spotted the flaw in his theory as well, did you? Yes, I can understand why he may have thought it would work. However, I don't necessarily think he was on the right track. About 11 o'clock, a queer knowledge came that something was near me, yet nothing happened for a whole hour after that. Then suddenly I felt the cold, queer wind begin to blow upon me. To my astonishment, it seemed now to come from behind me, and I whipped round with a hideous quake of fear. The wind met me in the face. It was blowing up from the floor close to me. I stared down in a sickening maze of new frights. What on earth had I done now? The ring was there, close beside me, where I'd put it. Suddenly, as I stared bewildered, I was aware that there was something queer about the ring. Funny, shadowy movements and convolutions. I looked at them stupidly, and then abruptly I knew that the wind was blowing up at me from the ring. A queer, indistinct smoke became visible to me, seeming to pour upwards through the ring and mix with the moving shadows. Suddenly I realised that I was in more than any mortal danger, for the convoluting shadows about the ring were taking shape, and the death hand was forming within the pentacle. My goodness, do you realise it? I'd brought the gateway into the pentacles, and the brute was coming through, pouring into the material world as gas might pour from the mouth of a pipe. Now, if you want to trap it in the circle, okay, yes, I see it, but don't be in there with it. Yeah, I think he was considering it would cut it off completely, in all aspects, all dimensions. And I don't think he was thinking of it like that. However, as you suspected, it did not go well. I should think that I knelt there for a moment in a sort of stunned fright. Then, with a mad, awkward movement, I snatched at the ring, intending to hurl it out of the pentacle. Yet it eluded me, as though some invisible living thing jerked it hither and thither. At last I gripped it, yet in the same instant it was torn from my grasp with incredible and brutal force. A great black shadow covered it, and rose into the air and came at me. I saw that it was the hand, vast and nearly perfect in form. I gave one crazy yell and jumped over the pentacle and the ring of burning candles and ran despairingly for the door. I fumbled idiotically and ineffectually with the key, and all the time I stared with a fear that was like insanity towards the barriers. The hand was plunging toward me, yet even as it had been unable to pass into the pentacle when the ring was without, so now the ring was within, it had no power to pass out. The monster was chained, as surely as any beast would be, were chains riveted upon it. Even then, I got a flash of this knowledge, but I was too utterly shaken with fright to reason, and the instant I managed to get the key turned, I sprang into the passageway and slammed the door with a crash. Exactly, Gaby. There we go. I locked it and got to my room somehow, for I was trembling so that I could hardly stand, as you can imagine. I locked myself in and managed to get the candle lit. Then I lay down on my bed and kept quiet for an hour or two, and so I got steadied. I got a little sleep later, but woke when Peter brought my coffee. When I'd drunk it, I felt altogether better and took the old man along with me whilst I had a look into the grey room. I opened the door and peeped in. The candles were still burning, wan against the daylight, and behind them was the pale glowing star of the electric pentacle. And there in the middle was the ring, the gateway of the monster, lying demure and ordinary. Nothing in the room was touched, and I knew that the brute had never managed to cross the pentacles. Then I went out and locked the door. After a sleep of some hours, I left the house. I returned in the afternoon in a cab. I had with me an oxyhydrogen jet and 2 cylinders containing the gases. I carried the things into the grey room, and there, in the centre of the electric pentacle, I erected the little furnace. 5 minutes later, the luck ring, once the luck, but now the bane of the Anderson family, was no more than a little solid splash of hot metal. I have a sneaking suspicion he went home. I can't imagine necessarily that the local town would necessarily have had a well enough equipped hardware store to provide him with a cutting torch. Which does imply that Carnacki keeps in his house all sorts of electrical and industrial equipment. This were a Johnny Sims story, melting the ring would let the monster loose. It's the standard genie in the bottle thing, isn't it? Depending on which legend you listen to, smashing the container either frees the genie or destroys it. And quite frankly, until you suck it and see, you have no idea which side you're likely to be on. Carnacki felt in his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. He passed it to me. I opened it and found a small circle of greyish metal, something like lead, only harder and rather brighter. Well, I asked at length after examining it and handing it round to the others. Did that stop the haunting? Carnacki nodded. Yes, he said. I slept 3 nights in the grey room before I left. Old Peter nearly fainted when he knew that I meant to, but by the 3rd night he seemed to realise that the house was just safe and ordinary. And you know, I believe in his heart he hardly approved. Carnacki stood up and began to shake hands. How'd you go? He said genially. And presently we went, pondering, to our various homes. Yeah, I said it was going to be a short one. I apologise for that. Just the tail end. I could have sworn that there was more to it after that bit. There is another story that could be interesting. Not the Searcher of the End House. Searcher of the End House is huge. Just one more. Okay. Right, this is one I actually have in a book. It was a lost short story. If people are interested. Got published in some of the later editions of not Confessions of a Ghost Hunter. My brain just went away then. Of Carnacki the Ghost Finder. Let's check. No. Right. So yes, this one, oh gosh. It's one I wouldn't mind doing next week if people are interested, because I'm going to have to use my actual Dead Tree copy, not in my ebook version. The thing is, it's a non-supernatural investigation. Proof that Carnacki isn't always called in for hauntings and murders and weird shit. It's something he is asked to get involved in. And something that it's a bit of a locked room mystery. Now, a lot of people have it down as the very weakest of the Carnacki stories. I always rather liked it because it is a straight detective story, and it's nice to see a supernatural detective doing more of the detective stuff and not only the supernatural. So this one didn't get printed until I think the collection August Derleth put together for Arkham House, which tells you a lot. August Derleth, of course, for those who do not know, is the person who took on the legacy of H.P. Lovecraft and was a contemporary and aficionado of him. And in my mind, some of the stuff August Derleth himself wrote came off more pastiche than anything else. He always was a bit more overblown than Lovecraft. Lovecraft's hype man, yep. And he was a better editor than he was a writer, let's put it that way. So when he put together a collection of Carnacki stories in 1948, he included two, which is The Find and The Hog. Now, The Find is a non-supernatural detective story, short story. The Hog is almost a novella. It's very, very long. And unfortunately, without a degree of updating of the costumes, I'm not entirely sure how one could do it, an adaptation on TV or film. As a story, it would work great. It's incredibly disturbing. Unfortunately, because of the materials tech of the time, it features such things as both men involved in the story, which is about somebody under attack from a spiritual psychic force at night in his dreams. It involves the electric pentacle and its evolution, but it also involves them dressing in insulated gear. So basically they're in Indian rubber coveralls and rubber boots and gloves. And unfortunately, that, to me, that would look so weird. But effectively, they're in supernatural hazmat gear. And that one, The Hog, has been adopted very much into the kind of Lovecraftian canon. That sounds so sticky. I can only imagine the squeaking. You know, I'm not sure about that. I suppose if you did it modern setting, you might be able to get away with it by putting them in effectively wetsuits or something, or literally just hazmat gear. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure about the whole Indian rubber coveralls. That's a bit weird. And also the beastie in it, the hog itself, does appear in one of the Call of Cthulhu monster manuals. I say monster manual. The additional books of beasties from non-Lovecraft, well, mostly non-Lovecraft fiction. Because the hog is, what's that term? Oh yeah, bloody terrifying. And far, far bigger than you would expect. It sits very well along the lines of, you know, the nastier end of Lovecraft stuff that really should never, ever, ever be let out, and, you know, wherever it is, you just hope nobody summons it. You know? It's not a story of immediate peril of getting chased by something so much as it is, oh, there's a large hole in the world and oh dear. So seeing Carnacki deal with something on that scale whilst sitting next to the very mundane story of the find, is an interesting piece of whiplash, I have to say, tonally, but it kind of works. It's a shame that neither story was published during William Hope Hodgson's life. But yes, I rather like it personally. I rather like both. The Hog is a bit of a slow burn, and the explanation at the end wanders off into all sorts of cosmic weirdness and theories. But they're both solid stories, and The Find is a fun one. So that's one I think I will do The Find next week. And I apologise in advance should I slip and attempt to actually do the Dutch accent of one of the people involved. I will try not to. So, again, apologies for this being a bit of a short one. I am going to go and sort myself out a drink, and then I will hopefully be back online fairly shortly. And your presence has been appreciated. I hope you enjoyed The Gateway of the Monster. I always like that Carnacki deals with both the genuine supernatural and the fraud, or the misinterpreted. It's not a straight up ghost hunt each time. And yeah, it is a bit of a Scooby-Doo, by the way, The Find. It almost ends up with and I would have got away with it too if it wasn't for you pesky kids element. Okay, so thank you very much indeed, and I hope to see you next Monday at the earlier time of 7:30, when the country isn't currently on fire or in the microwave as it feels. I'm going to go and get a drink now and a nice lolly. I'll see you again in a bit. Bye bye.